Hey everyone, today I want to go over connectors, tables, and queries. Data is the core of most apps, including apps you build with Power Apps. Data is stored in a data source, and you bring the data into your app by creating a connection. So, what this sentence means is there can be multiple data, like there can be a database here, and if you have an application, you want to use the data, like for example, to query the data or do anything, you will have to create a connection. Okay, so you'll have to create a connection to query the data source. Okay, the connection uses a specific connector. So the way a connection is made is by using this thing called connectors to talk to the data source. Power Apps has connectors for many popular services and on-premises data sources, including SharePoint, SQL Server, Office 365, Salesforce, and Twitter. So what this means is you can create an application with data from any of these data sources. So you could make an application that appends data to a SQL Server or SharePoint list or a Salesforce table, or you can even make an application that uh, creates a tweet or reads a tweet from a particular person. Anything where you have a connector, you can build an app for that, app with that. Tables versus actions. If your connector provides tables, add your data sources and then select the table in the data source that you want to manage. Power Apps retrieves table data into your app and updates data in your data source automatically. So, a table, as you know, is sort of like a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. You will have a heading like a column name. Like in Excel, you might just call it as a heading, but in database language, they call it as a column. And tables will have multiple rows with data for each of those columns, right? So a table will contain rows and columns, and that's how data is stored. So some connectors, for example, as I said, SQL Server, there's SQL, all data in a SQL Server is stored as a table, right? And SharePoint also has SharePoint lists, which are essentially a table as well. And Power App retrieves table data into your app and updates data in your data source automatically. So you have functions which gets data from those tables, and you can also update data in those data sources automatically. You don't have to like write a SQL statement or anything. You just have to program the Power Apps to do what it needs to do in the table. Specify the data that your app retrieves by customizing the item property of the control that shows your data. So I will go over the items property and controls later. But essentially, what item property is basically when you have a button, when you click on that button, like you can make it do something. You can make it append data or get data or do whatever you need to do. There is also functions for sorting, filtering. Uh, so it's a sort or filter the data in your table by using the name as an argument for the search and sort by function. I will go over the sort, filter, sort by functions later, but essentially, like you just have to know that there are functions which allows you to sort and filter the data in the tables that are connected to a data source. So if the data source that you're connecting to is a table data, you can do things like sort, filter, and many other things. There's also actions. So unlike tables, actions or don't store the data in rows and columns. Okay, there are other kinds of data sources that aren't tables, such as emails, calendars, Twitter, and notifications. So what this basically is saying, like, see emails, like if you go to Gmail or Outlook, you are not going to see a table. You will just see like who sent it and when was it sent and everything. Same with calendars, you will actually see what are the calendar entries I have today, that kind of thing. So it's not actually a table; it's just stored in a different way. Like, and also Twitter is like has multiple tweets. Now they changed it to X. I'm not sure how you call it as a tweet. I think you call it X's. I'm not sure. And notifications, like you could notifications we will go over later, but you can have notifications that appear in Power Apps also as well, just like how you have notifications in your mobile applications. I'll go over this later, but essentially you just have to know that some connectors are not tables. Like it allows you to do other things rather than just listing the data in a row and column format. Instead of selecting a table as the next step, manually connect a control to an action by editing the item property of the control that shows your data. So what this is saying is we are going way ahead right now. So basically, when you connect to a table data source, you select the table that you want to add or delete. Okay, but when you connect to a table, you'll just be able to see all table data source. You'll be able to see all the tables that is available. But in actions, you will you'll be able to see controls that you can do. For example, in Twitter, you might have a control which allows you to tweet a tweet, right? So it says item property of the control. So, for example, if Twitter was imported as the connector, there might be a property called add tweet or get tweet, which gets the tweet or adds a tweet on your behalf. So before we go on to the next section, I want to quickly go over dynamic schema. uh, we are actually jumping the gun way too much. Dynamic schema might not be relevant, like, you might not understand it right away. But dynamic schema is a common type of result for action based connectors. So, what it's saying is, uh, so action based connectors uh, provide some things like table or text and all, right? For example, if you call it Twitter, it's going to give you a list of tweets that a person has done. Dynamic schema refers to the possibility that the same action might return a table with different columns depending on how it is called. So, uh, for example, SQL Server stored procedure might return different columns if run with different inputs. Or Azure DevOps instance might use custom fields that aren't available by default. So, what this is saying is some actions give out things like tables or text or something. Some actions just give a single text. Some actions give out an entire table. Dynamic schema is basically saying, depending on the way it is called. For example, in a stored procedure, if you're familiar with stored procedure, you can make it give out a result which depends entirely on the inputs of that stored procedure. So SQL stored procedure will take in like multiple variables, and depending on what that variable is using, or depending on the way that stored procedure is written, it will take the variables and decide what it should output. And that output columns might not be the same as for a different input. So that is dynamic schema. Next thing I want to talk quickly about is standard and custom connectors. So Power Apps provide standard connectors for many commonly used data sources. As you said, like we talked about things like SharePoint, SQL Server, Office 365. These are examples of standard connectors. You do not need any additional cost for that. Standard connectors don't require special licensing. So as long as you have a license which is able to access Power Apps, you don't need any extra license. I want to quickly go over how we are able to authenticate. There are multiple ways of authenticating into a connector. The most used one is Microsoft Entra. This authentication is a secure type of connection. For example, SharePoint uses this type of authentication. uh, when you connect, the Microsoft Entra identifies you separately to SharePoint on your behalf. You don't have to supply a username or password. So what this is saying is, when you make an app that uses SharePoint as the data source, you should also have access to the underlying SharePoint data source for you to be able to access the uh, so the application basically on behalf of you accesses SharePoint. So in order for the application to access the data on your behalf, you should have access to SharePoint. You don't have to supply a username or password because the authentication is already done when you first log in into the application. And next, as an author, you can create and work with the data source with your credentials. So what this is saying is, if you're making the application, you can just use your credentials. You don't have to create a special set of credentials just to create the application. When you publish your application and you publish uh, and your application user logs in, they do so with their credentials. All this is saying is basically like, the author, when they are making the application, they use their credentials, and when the user logs in into the application, they use their credentials, and based on the credentials, it is able to access the required data. If the data is appropriately secured on a backend, your users can only see what they're authorized to see based on their credentials. We already talked about this before. All it's saying is, whatever data you are authorized to see, only that data will be seen Microsoft Power Apps when you log in with Microsoft Entra for the for the application. This type of security allows you to change the rights for specific application users on the backend data source after the application is published. So basically, like, you could change the rights a person has even after the application is already created, or it's in production. For example, if you have a SQL table that has, let's say, 100 rows, and user A should only see the first 50 rows and user B should see the last 50 rows, and for some reason, due to some business requirements, let's say user A needs to see top 70 rows. Okay, top 70 rows, we can quickly change it. All you have to do is you have to go to the backend data source like SQL or SharePoint, whichever is using Microsoft Entra as the authentication. You can quickly modify the rights that particular person has, and they will be able to see the data that is assigned to them. So if you change a data available to the person A from the top 50 to top 70, they'll be quickly able to see that in the Microsoft Power Apps also. I mean, Power Apps will also be able to access the top 70 instead of top 50. Okay. For instance, you can grant access, deny access, or refine what a user or set of users can see, all on the backend data source. Just repeating what I just said. So I'm just going to have a tutorial right now where we will add a data source, connect the following table. We will connect to a SharePoint table. We will connect to an Excel table. We'll also connect to a Dataverse table. We'll do all of that right now. So for this tutorial, we would need an M365 for business license. You can just go to Google or Bing and just type M365 for business and go to the first link, and you can select this button called See Plans and Pricing, and you select the most basic one and click try for free. This already includes Microsoft Excel and SharePoint as the service that is included. You can click try for free. Once you click this button, it's going to ask you for things like try free for 1 month. Before you start your trial, you need to set up your subscription by adding up to 25 free users, and you keep it for 1 month. You don't need to do anything else, just keep it for 1 month, and you can click next. It's going to ask you for your email address. Type the my Microsoft Entra user that was created before. I'm just going to put my Microsoft Entra account, and when I click next, if that account already exists, it's going to take you to it's going to allow you to solve a problem. Once you solve this problem, it will take you to, now it's saying let's get you started. Looks like you are already using the email address with another Microsoft service. You can click on this sign in. You click on this sign in, and you can select which account you want to log in into. Let's wait for a while. And it will take you to this M365 admin center. And here you can fill in your details like your middle name, last name, and everything. And you can click save. And once you do that, uh, y- you will be able to fill the rest of the information, and it'll give you 25 licenses, and you can use this for multiple accounts also. It might ask you for things like PAN number. Once you put in your PAN number, I don't have my tax ID. I'm just going to put my PAN ID. Might be different for other countries. Just bear in mind. And once you filled in all this information, you can click try now. Once you have done that, you can go to M365 Business Center. It will automatically take you there. You can go to billing, you can go to licenses, and you'll see all the licenses that you have access to. You can go to M365 Business Basic, and you can assign it to yourself or you can assign it to multiple people. I'm just going to quickly assign it to the account that I am logged in into. And yeah, so now this particular user has access to M365. So what he can do right now, he would be able to. So if I'm the person who's logged in into it, and if I refresh M365, so you see there is one license that is assigned. I can go to office.com and I can click sign in. And when I log in with that particular account that I have given license to, so if I go to office.com, office.com or m365.com, and you are logged in into a user, you'll be able to go to apps, and you'll be able to see all the apps that you can use. So Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and all. So you have access to M365. One of the M365 applications is Excel. So I'm quickly going to create a Excel table. So Excel table is a bit different than just creating a some values in cells. So to create an Excel table, you have to like have a heading. Let's use the first row as a heading row. I'm just going to call it heading one and heading heading two, and I'm going to highlight these heading, and I'm going to go to insert, and I'm going to click table. It says the data for your table is in the following ranges A1 to B1. So when I do that, it created a column 1 and column 2. I'm just going to rename it as heading 1, and I'm going to rename this as heading 2. I'm just going to put some value like 1 A, 2 B, 3 C. Okay, so this can be used as a data source in Power Apps. I'm just going to save it. It's already saved. You don't have to do anything, but you might want to rename this to something else. I'm just going to call it test table. I'm going to call it Excel table data source. Okay, Excel table data source or XLSX. So since we have created a Microsoft Excel table, and we're going to add the table into a Power App. So I just created a blank canvas app, and there's this button called add data. I'm going to go to add data, and there's this thing called connectors. You can select connectors, and you can search. Like you might be able to find the connector you want directly, or you can search also. I'm just going to put Excel, Excel. There's a thing called Excel Online Business. There's also another one called Import from Excel. This adds a static data. You won't be able to manipulate that data at all. It will be a static data. So you should always use Excel Online if you want it to be dynamic. So I'm going to select Excel Online, and I'm going to click connect, and let's wait for it to load. And I'm just going to click OneDrive for Business, because the Excel sheet that we created is stored in OneDrive. And I click OneDrive, and I'm able to see the Excel sheet that we created. And here you'll be able to select the table you want. The table name would correspond to the name of the table. So if I go to Excel, see if I go, if I select the table and I go to table design, you see it's called table one. So this table one would correspond to the application that we have created. So when I select choose table, I select table one. The data in the table one is now it's asking us to select an identifier. You can make it automatically insert an identifier if you want. I'm going to do that. Let it automatically create an identifier for us. So if I go back to that Excel sheet, a Power App generated identifier column would be created. But if you already have a column that you use as an identifier, you can use that also. But bear in mind, like every time you add a row, you will have to write a logic which adds a number to it, or create a unique row for that. That could cause a problem. So now that we have added a table, and like imagine you just want to see the table as it is, I can go to insert, and I can go to display, and uh, I can go to, yeah, so there's table. I'm just going to click data table, and I'm just going to click table one, and here you are able to see heading one and heading two values as it is. Okay, so what we have done right now, we have created an Excel table, and we are using that as a data source for our application. And I think we are jumping the gun a little bit here. I'm just going to create a button which adds data to that table. So if I go to button, okay, and then on select, I can put patch. The record that I want to do is table one, and we are trying to put heading one as, I'm just going to put 4, and heading 2 as test. Okay, and when I, so what I'm going to do is, right now, if I click play, and if I click this button, a new row gets added. So it's not just in the application, you can go to the Excel spreadsheet also, which I have opened right here, and a new row also gets created. So what we have learned just now is we can use a Excel table as a data source for our application, and the application would be able to manipulate the data source to do things like reading the data and adding the data as well. We will talk more details on manipulating data later, but right now I just want to show that it is possible to use Excel as a data source. So we already talked about Excel. Now let's talk about Dataverse. I will talk about SharePoint in a while, but right now I'm going to talk about Dataverse. So Dataverse is the default data source that is part of Power Apps. And it's pretty easy to set up if you already have a Power Apps environment already installed. So if I go back to Power Apps, and I'm just going to click Save, and I'm just going to save this application right now. If I go save, yeah, what's happening? If I go back, leave. Uh, I'm going to go to tables. So tables basically allows you to see all the Dataverse tables that are available to us. There's a lot of default Dataverse tables that's available to us, like customer table. If I just go to customer table, you will see a set of default columns like customer name, customer. These are pre-populated data, and what else, like email also, you'll be able to see data like default table for emails also you will have. But I'm just going to create a new table right now. So I'm going to use the same headings that we had for Excel. I'm just going to use heading one, heading two, and I'm just going to have a auto generated identifier. I'm going to click new table, and I'm just going to select add columns and data. There's a new feature called describe new tables. You can just describe what type of application that you're creating, or whatever data you're storing, and it will create for you. And you can also upload Excel or SharePoint list, and it will create a Dataverse table with that data. But right now I'm just going to select the default one, add columns data. And the first column is, I'm just going to call it edit column, and I'm just going to call it heading one, and it's just going to be a number. Okay, just exactly like what we have here. The first one would be a number, second one would be a text, heading two would be a text, heading one would be a number. It is, let's put whole number. and I click update. And I'm just going to add a new column, heading 2, and it is going to be text. You can also have like plain text, text area, or if you want to have a specific type of text like email and phone number, that also you can do. But I'm just going to leave it as plain text for now, and I'm going to click save. And I'm just going to call this table. Instead of calling it table one, I'm going to rename this table as uh, data able data bers table one, and it also generates a plural name for each of the rows. And you can, like, for example, if this data contains data about car, and it automatically gives you a plural called cars. But I'm just going to keep it back to what it was before. Data was table one, and it also gives you a plural name. Primary column should be heading one, because like we will use heading one as the primary column, and that primary column is the column that will be used to uniquely identify each row. Okay, and I'm going to click save. And I'm just going to like input some random data, 1, 2, 3, A, B, C. Okay, and I'm going to click save and exit. Save and exit. I can go back to our application right now, or I can go to apps. I'm in the wrong environment. So I'm opening the application again, and this time instead of a Excel data source, we will add a Dataverse data store. Let's wait for it to load. Okay, so I'm just going to add another screen. We'll talk more about screens and all later, but just to know that an application can have multiple screens and you can navigate between them by creating buttons. Or even you're in developer environment, you could go to the tree view and see which screen you are in. I could go to data. Data tab is where you see what all data you will be using in this particular application. It doesn't show all the data sources that is used in this particular environment, just specific to this application. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click add data, and you'll be able to see all the tables in this environment. And you see we added this table called Dataverse table, right? And when I click Dataverse table one, it shows the plural name actually. Let's wait for it to load. So we have the table right now. I can do the same thing again, like how we did in the other page. I'm just going to uh, go to add, and I'm just going to uh, create a table, data table. And instead of table one, I'm just going to click Dataverse table, and you will see something similar. Okay, and Dataverse, the beauty is it automatically gives you a set of default columns, like created on, modified by, and everything, which may be useful for some applications, but you may not need it. To select which table that you want to see, you could go to fields, like select the data table, and you can see the property called fields. Right now, nine of them are selected. And if you just want to show the heading 1 and heading 2, you can remove the other ones. Okay, remove the other ones, won't take you much time. Or if you want to reorder it, that also you can do. Okay, similar, just like how we did for Excel, like we created a button, right? I'm just going to go to screen 2. I'm just going to copy this button. I'm going back to screen 2. I'm pasting that button here. Right now I don't want it to be patching it into table 1. Instead, I wanted to patch into this Dataverse table. So what I'm going to do is I just need to change this name, Dataverse table. Yeah, so just put Dataverse tables. Okay, so when the name is correct, it will turn green. That then you will know that the correct data source is selected. And if you read the code, you'll be able to see heading 1 a new row called 4 would be created, and heading 2, a new row called test will be created. When I click play button and I click this button, a new row gets created with 4 and 2 in it, just like how we did. You can click it multiple times, it will just create the same thing over and over again. Okay. And you see, I just want you to realize Dataverse is much faster. I can instantly do it, but that's not always the case with Excel. If I go back to the other screen, since this is using Excel, this might have a slight delay. See, there's a slight delay because Excel is not directly stored in Power Apps, it is stored in Microsoft OneDrive. It takes a while for data to go from Power Apps. I mean, the Power Apps environment that you're in, it's whatever environment you're in, it has to go from Power Apps environment, it has to go to OneDrive and then add the data. So, as much as possible, your best bet would be to use Dataverse for all the applications as much as possible. So, as I said, there's this thing called actions, which is not similar to tables. As I said, there are several types of actions like emails, calendars, Twitter, and everything. I want to go over an action that is pretty easy to implement, and that action is Office 365 users. It is used to get details about all the users that is available uh, to us, like to Office 365. So when you create a Microsoft Entra ID and you subscribe to Office 365 and you give subscription Office 365 subscription to those users, those details could be accessed with this connector called Office 365 users. So now they have rebranded Office 365 to M365, but they still haven't changed the name of this collector as yet. Maybe in the future they might. So going to Power Apps, I can, just like how I created connectors for Excel and uh, Dataverse, I can click Add Data, and I'm just going to select Office Office 365 users. So I'm just going to select Office 365 users. And as you see, you see I'm logged in into this user called CEO at my domain. Okay. And it is accessing this connector through my credentials called CEO at whatever my domain is. Okay, I will cover up my domain, but essentially the username is CEO. And if I want to search for a person's name, I could use this connector. I just want to tell you that we are able to store um, variables using this set command. Okay, so set can essentially do things like set. I'm just going to call this variable test var one, and if I want to set this variable as test, okay, and so when I select this button, a variable called test var1 with the value test will be created. So if I click play and I select this button, I can go to variables, and you see there is this variable called test, which is a text, view text, and I'm able to see that value as text. But that's not what we want. We want to search a user's name using the connector that we had created right now. So what I can do is just like how I use the set, and I could call this connector called Office 365 users dot search users v2, and sorry, no, search users, and it's asking for two variables, search term, okay, and it is going to ask top how many users that you want. I'm going to just put test, okay, because I have a user called test user, and I'm going to get only top 10 users. Okay, so what it's actually searching is it's going to our Microsoft Enter directory and searching for all the users that have been given M365 license. uh, you, if you haven't set up your Microsoft Enter and given Office 65 license to a user with test in their name, you will not get anything. Don't worry about it. Okay, and if I click this button, it is running something in the background. And if I, just like how I did last time, I can go to variables, and you see a table with one row is created. I can click view data, and you see there is a user with display name test user. Okay, and yeah, so if you had populated all this data in Microsoft Enter, all this details will also be available to you. And I'm just going to quickly change it to such that it is CEO. So it's just searching my name, and if I click play, run, and I just view table again. See, the display name is CEO, and it's able to find that user as well. So this doesn't. I know the output of this function gives out a table. This, I mean, the connector, the output of this connector gives out a table, but see, there are multiple other things that this connector can do. One of them is search user. So if I remove search user and all the input parameters, there are other things like I'm able to find who the manager of that person is. I can get the user's photo if I want to display it somewhere. There are many other connectors. It is not directly displaying a table like how we created a connector for Microsoft Entra and Excel. So remember, when we added Excel, it directly allows you to select what table that you want. But in here, it is just a connector which has functions which allows you to get table, not necessarily tables. So, for example, if I go to uh, user profile, user photo, this will give out a photo instead of um, instead of a table, for instance. So that's something to watch out for. If it is an action, the output might be a table, but it's not table directly. For the rest of the video, I'm just quickly going to go through the different type of authentications that's available to us. As I said, there was Microsoft Entra ID, and we have already gone through three sources. So Office 365, Excel, and Dataverse we have gone through. I couldn't do SharePoint right now because it takes a while to set up. But as you see, Excel, Dataverse, and Office 365 all use Microsoft Entra as the authentication. So, uh, what Power Apps does is it supplies the authenticated user's credential to the data source, and on behalf of the logged in user, it's getting the data. But there are other types of data authentication types as well. Another one is open standard authentication. This is used by not only Power Apps, it's used by multiple applications, or a multiple application that is connecting to a service. For example, Twitter uses this type of authentication. So there is a connector for Twitter. I'm just going to quickly show that to you as well. If I go to Power Apps, so what you can do is you could go to connections. I mean, you can leave your application, and there is this thing called connections. Here you'll be able to see all the connections and all the applications that you have. You can click new connection, and there is this thing for X. Before it was called Twitter, now they changed it to X. You can click this, and it's going to ask you the authentication type. Okay, bring your own application, and it's going to ask you for this thing called consumer key. I don't have a consumer key, but you can go to x.com, and you can go to developer. So you can go to more, so you can just search X developer portal, and you can read through this documentation and create an application, and you should be able to get this consumer key and secret key. I'm just going to give a dummy one right now. It's nothing, it's not even real. And I can click create. Okay, so it's failed to log in response. Response code does not indicate success. So like, if you do that, and you should be able to add this connected to your application. Okay, but I just want to, I don't have a developer account for X, but you should be able to do it. And what else I want to go to? So I want to go to shared connections slash implicit connection. I want to go through what shared connections and implicit connections is. Okay, so what's the difference between shared connections and implicit connection? In a shared connection, the username and password for the connection is supplied by Power Apps Author at the time the data source is created in the application. The connection authentication to the data source is then implicitly shared with end user. Once the application is published, the connection is also published and available to your users. So what this is saying is basically, when assume that you're trying to connect to a data source, it can be anything, but it just relies on a username and password. You can provide that username and password to Power Apps, and regardless of who is using, the guy who's creating the application or the user of the application, Power Apps will use the same username and password to connect to the data source. Before January 2024, end users could take the connection that is shared with them and create new application. So when you used to share that application, the connection is also shared, but the problem is, like, once the connection is shared, that user can do whatever he wants. So that was not very secure. So after January 2024, all new shared connections are secured. Old apps must be republished to be secured. This connection is no longer shared with the end user. The Power Apps talks to a connection proxy. Connection proxy is a bit complicated, but all it's doing is, like, all it is like, when you call a connector, it uses this thing called connection, a proxy, to call the uh, call the data source on your behalf. Okay, so that is the basic definition of what a proxy is. So, like, the connection proxy only talks to specific Power Apps for which it is linked. All it's saying is, connection proxy only talks to one app. It cannot be used for multiple apps right now. But before Jan 2024, it was, but things have changed. You just have to republish it to make it secure. There's another type of authentication called Windows authentication. Use Windows authentication when you need to connect to a data source that is on premises. This type of connection isn't secure because it doesn't rely on end user authentication. So as much as possible, you should not use Windows authentication as possible. So when would you use Windows authentication? Let's assume you have a SQL server running on a machine. Let's assume that it's a Windows machine which does not have public IP address, only a local IP address it has, and that, let's assume, it's in a data center. Okay, and you want to access this. The way you would do it is, you have to go through a gateway. The connection must go through a gateway. Since it goes through a gateway, connector has access to all data on that data source. So a gateway is essentially, let's assume we have the Power Apps environment here, PA. Okay, this is going to call PAE. So we have the Power Apps environment, and so what, a gateway would be installed in the network appliance of the data center. Let's just call it data center. In the network appliance, you would have a gateway, and that gateway can be used to access the Power App environment. And the thing is, I don't think you even need a public IP address. Even a local IP address would be enough to connect to Power Apps environment. And Power Apps can use this gateway, via this gateway, and it's able to access uh, the data source using the username and password, just like how you would log in into Microsoft Windows. So essentially, what Power Apps would do is, it supplies the username and password, just like how you would log in into Microsoft Windows, and it accesses the server using that username and password. The problem is, like, if you have another machine which also has some sensitive data, okay, let's call put a S here. It's able to use the same gateway for this machine as well. So it's not very secure. As a result, any information that you can access with the Windows credentials you supply are available to the connector. So somebody is able to take that connector, and they can uh, like, do whatever they want with it, even if they shouldn't be doing it. And once the application is published, the connection is also published and available to your users. And I just want to go through data sources with regard to solutions as well. As you know, solution, like, I've already gone through this in my previous videos, but I just want to say, solution helps with application lifecycle management and offer ways to manage the lifecycle of the data source. If a Canvas app in a solution, connection references and environment variables can be created to store information about the data source. This setup this setup makes it easy to change or reconnect data sources when you move solution to different environment. So I just want to go through consent dialog as well. When users open an app that uses connection for the first time, they see a connection consent. So connection consent will basically look like a box which will ask for the consent of the user. So it'll just be like a box which says something like, do you consent to the, like, let's say if it is OneDrive, so you'll have the OneDrive logo here, and it'll say like, do you consent to, and like a yes or no button will be there, and that person will be able to click on that button, and that would give consent to the user. So the for the following purposes. When a user opens an app that uses connectors for the first time, they see a connection consent dialog for the following purposes: to inform users about the data sources accessed by the app. It will tell you, like for example, it is using OneDrive or it is using Microsoft Excel. It will tell you what source is being used by the app, to outline the actions a connection might or might not perform in the app. To tell you what it's going to do in the app. Like it might just be editing a table, it might be accessing multiple tables. So all that information will be here. To capture end user consent to connect to the data that the app uses. Then, like a user might not consent to it. In that case, they will not use the app at all. To facilitate manual end user authentication when needed. Some connectors, like for example, as I talked about, OAuth authentication. So in OAuth, the authentication is actually provided by the user. Okay, so like for example, when you're using Twitter, the authentication is given by the user of the application. During the consent dialog, it will ask for the username and password for you to log in, so that uh, Power Apps will be able to use your username and password for accessing that data source. For some connectors, Power Platform can automatically authenticate a user to access the data source. However, if the automatic sign-in fails, this dialog prompts user to fix a connection by manually signing in. I haven't seen this before, but I think this is like a backup if any of the other things fail. I just want to say that's all, folks. See you in the next video on data connectors. So I'll talk more about data connectors in my next video. Till then, have a nice day. Bye.